The sound of a femur snapping creates a vibration that travels up the spine and settles directly into the teeth, a jarring, sickening sensation that acts as a biological alarm bell, screaming that the structural integrity of the body has been compromised. It is a sound I will carry with me to my grave, louder than the sirens that eventually came, louder than the lies that followed. But as I lay twisted at the bottom of the grand mahogany staircase in my own foyer, struggling to draw breath through the agony radiating from my right hip, it was not the physical pain that shattered my world. It was the silence. And then, following the silence, the low, guttural chuckle of my only son, Lucas. He was standing at the top of the stairs, looking down at his broken mother, not with horror, not with the panic of a child seeing their parent injured, but with a relief so palpable it chilled the air around us. Beside him, his wife Camila smoothed her silk blouse, her face a mask of cold calculation as she nudged a potted fern back into place with the toe of her shoe, checking for dirt on the floor before checking on my life. They did not call for an ambulance immediately. They did not rush down to hold my hand. They stood there for a full minute, watching me writhe, savoring the moment my independence died. What they did not know, however, was that while my body was broken, my mind had just snapped into a clarity sharper than any diamond. That fall did not kill Eleanor Vance, it woke her up. My name is Eleanor Vance. I am 72 years old, the co-founder of Vance and Sterling Architecture, a firm that reshaped the skyline of Seattle over the last 4 decades. I spent a lifetime commanding boardrooms, navigating the cutthroat world of commercial real estate, and raising skyscrapers from wet concrete. I thought I knew everything there was to know about structural integrity, about how things are built and how they crumble. But I learned the hardest lesson of my life inside the walls of my own estate in Queen Anne. I learned that the rot you cannot see is the one that brings the house down, and sometimes the people you build your life around are the very ones swinging the wrecking ball. To understand the magnitude of the betrayal, you must understand the depth of the grief that preceded it. 2 years ago, my husband William died. We were not just a married couple, we were a singular force. William was the creative visionary, the man who could look at a blank lot and see a cathedral of glass and light. I was the steel spine of the business, the one who understood load-bearing walls, zoning laws, and the brutal reality of finance. When pancreatic cancer took him in a matter of months, it felt as if the foundation of my world had liquefied. I was left alone in a 6-bedroom historic mansion overlooking the Puget Sound, surrounded by silence and memories that were too painful to touch. The house, a Victorian masterpiece we had restored together, suddenly felt less like a home and more like a mausoleum. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like his footsteps. Every shadow looked like his profile. I stopped going into the firm. I stopped attending the charity galas. I retreated into the shell of the estate, withering away in the gloom. That was when Lucas and Camila stepped in. Lucas, my 40-year-old son, had always been a drifter. He possessed his father's charm but none of his work ethic. He bounced between failed startups, half-finished degrees, and passion projects that burned through cash faster than a wildfire. He was always the dreamer, never the builder. When William died, Lucas appeared at the funeral looking genuinely devastated. He held me as I wept, his tears mingling with mine. At the time, I thought we were bonding over our shared loss. I thought the tragedy had finally matured him. Camila, a woman he had married 3 years prior after a whirlwind romance in Miami, was the picture of the dutiful daughter-in-law. She was younger, sharp-featured, and impeccably dressed, with a background she kept vaguely defined as consulting. She brought casseroles, organized the flower arrangements, and shielded me from the well-meaning but exhausting condolences of our social circle. She was efficient, quiet, and seemingly indispensable. 6 months after the funeral, during a dinner where the silence of the big house felt particularly suffocating, they proposed the arrangement. They were living in a trendy but cramped condo downtown, a place Lucas constantly complained was stifling his creativity. They suggested that they move into the estate to keep me company. Lucas argued that the house was too big for one person to manage, that I was isolating myself dangerously, that William would have wanted family around me. Camila held my hands across the table, her eyes wide with a rehearsed concern I was too grief-stricken to recognize as performance art. She told me that they just wanted to ensure I was safe, that they wanted to fill the house with life again. In my haze of loneliness, I interpreted their predation as love. I desperately wanted to believe that I still had a family. I said yes. The first few months were deceptively idyllic, a honeymoon period designed to lower my defenses. The house felt alive again. There was music in the evenings, the smell of roasted garlic and herbs from the kitchen, and the comforting rhythm of other human beings moving through the halls. I felt a fool for ever hesitating. But slowly, imperceptibly, the atmosphere began to shift. It started with small boundary violations, tiny erosions of my authority that seemed petty to complain about. My private study, a sanctuary where William and I had drafted our first blueprints, was gradually colonized by Lucas's gaming equipment and piles of business papers, for a venture he refused to explain in detail. Camila began reorganizing the kitchen, moving my favorite tea sets and spices to high shelves she knew I could not reach without a stool, subtly reinforcing a narrative of my physical decline. When I asked why she had moved them, she would smile that tight, patronizing smile and say she was just trying to declutter, that I shouldn't be worrying about cooking anyway at my age. Then came the financial requests. They were small at first, testing the waters. A few $1,000s for a transmission repair on Lucas's vintage Porsche. A loan to cover a credit card bill that Lucas swore was an administrative error by the bank. I paid them without question. I had millions in the trust. What was money compared to family? But the requests grew in frequency and magnitude. By the end of the first year, I had dispensed nearly $250,000 to fund Lucas's investment opportunities that never materialized, and Camila's medical treatments for vague, shifting ailments that required expensive specialists who didn't take insurance. I began to feel a prickle of unease, a dormant instinct from my business days warning me that the numbers did not add up. But whenever I tried to bring it up, the gaslighting would begin. It was a psychological warfare campaign waged with terrifying precision. If I asked Lucas about the return on an investment, he would sigh and look at Camila with a pitying expression, asking if I had forgotten that we discussed it last week. They would tell me I was becoming forgetful. They would recount conversations that never happened and deny ones that did. "Mom, we told you about that charge on the card," Lucas would say, his voice dripping with patronizing patience. "You really need to see a doctor about your memory. It's getting worse." They were painting a picture of a senile old woman, not just to me, but to the world. I would overhear Camila on the phone with her friends, or perhaps my friends, whispering about how difficult I was becoming, how I was wandering at night, how I was losing my grip on reality. They started intercepting the mail. Bank statements disappeared. When I asked for them, Lucas said he was handling the paperwork to relieve my burden. It was a terrifyingly effective strategy. I began to doubt my own mind. I would stand in the middle of a room and wonder why I had entered it, panic rising in my chest, wondering if they were right. Was I losing it? Was this how it happened? I started keeping a physical journal hidden inside a hollowed-out volume of an encyclopedia in the library, writing down every conversation immediately after it happened, just to verify my own sanity. The turning point came on a rainy Tuesday in November. The Seattle sky was a bruise of purple and gray, dumping sheets of rain against the windows. I had come home early from a board meeting. I remained the honorary chairwoman of the firm, though Lucas had been pressuring me to resign fully to find the house seemingly empty. I went to the kitchen to make tea, my hip aching slightly from the dampness. That was when I heard voices drifting from the library. The heavy oak doors were slightly ajar, letting a sliver of light escape into the hallway. "She's going to live to be 100 at this rate." Camila's voice was sharp, devoid of the syrupy sweetness she used in my presence. It was the voice of a woman checking a watch, impatient for a train that was late. "The doctor said her heart is strong. We can't wait 20 years, Lucas. The debts are due in January. If we don't pay the syndicate, they break your legs first, then mine." My hand froze on the handle of the teapot. I stood paralyzed, the blood draining from my face. I know. Lucas sounded frantic, his voice cracking. "But what do you want me to do? Push her down the stairs? There was a silence that lasted for a heartbeat, heavy and suffocating. If you had a spine, maybe, Camila scoffed, the sound of ice clinking in a glass following her words. We need that power of attorney, Lucas. If we get her declared incompetent, we control the trust, we control the assets, we can liquidate the portfolio, and no one can stop us. We just need one big incident. Something that proves she can't live alone. Something that forces the court's hand. She's my mother, Elena, Lucas mumbled, though the protest lacked any real conviction. She's an ATM, Lucas, Camila snapped. And right now, the machine is broken. We need to fix it. We need to make her look crazy, or we need to make her an invalid. Pick one. I retreated to my room silently, stepping carefully on the runner rugs to avoid creaking floorboards. I locked the door, slid down against the wood, and clamped a hand over my mouth to stifle the sob that threatened to tear my throat apart. The fog of grief and self-doubt evaporated instantly. They were not here to care for me. They were vultures circling a carcass that refused to die. My own son, the boy I had taught to ride a bike, the man I had bailed out of every mistake he ever made, was discussing my incapacitation as a logistical hurdle to clearing his gambling debts. And he had called his wife, Elena. I did not sleep that night. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, formulating a plan. I realized that if I threw them out now, they would claim I was having a psychotic break. They had spent a year laying the groundwork for my senility. They would use my anger as proof of my dementia. They would call the police, call the doctors, and have me committed for my own safety. No, I needed irrefutable proof. I needed to dismantle them with the same precision I used to design skyscrapers. I needed to find the cracks in their foundation and place the explosives. The next day, I feigned a migraine and told them I would be staying in bed. Once they left the house, supposedly for a business lunch, which I now knew was likely a shopping spree, I called Silas Thorne. Silas was a private investigator, recommended by the firm's legal team years ago for corporate espionage cases. He was a man who looked like a rumpled accountant, balding and unassuming, but he possessed the investigative instincts of a bloodhound and the discretion of a priest. We met in a diner 3 towns over, a place with sticky laminated menus where no one from my social circle would ever be caught dead. I told him everything. I gave him the account numbers I had memorized, the suspicious timeline, and the name Elena. I saw a flash of pity in his eyes, but it was quickly replaced by professional resolve. He told me to go home, to act normal, and to give him a week. That week was the longest of my life. I sat at the dinner table with them, eating the food Camila prepared, wondering if she was poisoning me. I listened to Lucas talk about his projects, nodding and smiling while imagining him rotting in a cell. I played the part of the confused old woman, asking the same question 3 times, leaving the stove on intentionally, feeding their narrative so they would get overconfident. Silas returned with a dossier that made my stomach turn. The reality was far worse than I had imagined. Lucas had racked up nearly $400,000 in gambling debts with an underground syndicate in Seattle. He had leveraged his expected inheritance to keep them at bay, but time had run out. But the real revelation was Camila. Her name was indeed Elena Rostova. She had been a home health aide in Florida 5 years ago. She had been investigated, but never charged in connection with the suspicious death of an elderly patient who had changed his will in her favor 3 weeks before he died of a heart attack. She had changed her name, moved west, and found the perfect mark in my weak-willed, greedy son. Silas also found the emails. They were communicating with a crooked lawyer named Sterling, no relation to my firm, who specialized in elder guardianship abuse. They were drafting a petition for emergency guardianship, citing rapid cognitive decline, paranoia, and physical inability to care for self. They planned to file it immediately after the holidays. They are escalating, Mrs. Vance, Silas warned me, tapping a photo of Elena meeting with the lawyer. They are getting desperate. You need to get out of that house. No, I said, my voice hard. If I leave, they win. They'll loot the house before I can get a court order. I need to catch them. I need them to do something undeniable. That's dangerous, Silas said. I built skyscrapers in earthquake zones, Silas, I replied. I know how to calculate risk. Set up the cameras. We installed hidden cameras. Not the cheap ones you buy online, but military-grade surveillance, pinhole lenses hidden in the crown molding, the chandeliers, the bookshelves, and the eyes of the portraits. Silas came in disguised as a HVAC repairman to install them. I spent the next few days recording. I recorded them stealing my jewelry, my grandmother's pearls, William's watch, and handing it off to a fence in the driveway. I recorded Elena spiking my herbal tea with crushed sleeping pills to make me groggy during the day. I poured the tea into the potted ficus when she wasn't looking and feigned exhaustion, watching them smirk at each other over my slumped form. Then came the day of the fall. It was 3 weeks before New Year's Eve. I was standing at the top of the staircase, adjusting a heavy oil painting of the coastline. I had deliberately left the stepladder there, playing the part of the confused old woman trying to do maintenance she shouldn't be doing, creating the perfect opportunity. I knew the cameras were rolling. I knew Silas was monitoring the feed remotely. Camila came up behind me. I saw her in the reflection of the glass over the painting. She didn't stumble. She didn't trip. She stopped, looked around the hallway to ensure it was empty, and checked the angle. She placed 2 hands flat against the small of my back. Her touch was cold. "Sorry, Eleanor," she whispered. And then she shoved. I tried to grab the banister, but the force was too sudden. The world spun into a blur of color and light. Gravity took hold, and I plummeted. The impact with the steps was a blur of violence, my body bouncing against the hard wood. When I landed at the bottom, on the marble floor of the foyer, the pain was absolute. My hip shattered. I couldn't move, I screamed, a raw, animalistic sound that tore through the house. Lucas came running from the living room. He looked up, saw Camila at the top of the stairs, and then looked down at me. He didn't rush to me. He didn't scream for help. He looked at his wife, then at me, and his shoulders sagged in relief. "Well," he said, his voice echoing in the high-ceilinged foyer, clear as a bell for the microphones. "That solves the timeline issue. She can't live alone if she can't walk. Make sure she's actually hurt before you call 911. Camila called down, descending the stairs with the grace of a predator, stepping over my outstretched arm. "We need the doctors to say she's incoherent from the pain. Don't let her talk until the meds kick in." I lay there, grinding my teeth to keep from passing out, recording every word in my memory, knowing the servers were capturing every frame. They waited 10 minutes before calling for help, 10 minutes of me groaning in agony while they discussed which state-run rehab center would be the cheapest to dump me in while they liquidated the assets. I spent Christmas in the hospital. I underwent surgery to place 3 titanium screws in my hip. I endured the humiliation of bedpans, the agony of physical therapy, and the haze of painkillers. Lucas and Camila visited every day, performing their role of grieving, concerned children for the nurses and doctors. They told the staff I had been wandering, that I had been refusing my medication, that I must have slipped while hallucinating. "We think it's time to discuss long-term care," Lucas told my orthopedic surgeon, holding my hand with a fake tenderness that made my skin crawl. "She's just not safe in that big house anymore. Her mind, it's gone, doctor." I said nothing. I let them talk. I played the part of the drugged, confused, invalid perfectly. I stared blankly at the wall, mumbled incoherent answers about my childhood, and let drool pool at the corner of my mouth when they were watching. I needed them to feel secure. I needed them to feel victorious. I insisted on being discharged on December 30th. I told them, in a moment of feigned lucidity, that I wanted to be home for the annual New Year's Eve gala. Every year, the Vance estate hosted the city's elite for a black-tie charity fundraiser for the Architectural Heritage Fund. Lucas and Camila tried to cancel it, citing my health, but I had my executive assistant who was in on the plan tell them that the invitations had already gone out, the caterers were paid, and canceling would look bad for the family image they were so desperate to inherit. They agreed, thinking it would be the perfect stage to debut my incompetence to high society. "Imagine the sympathy we'll get," I heard Camila whisper to Lucas as they drove me home, my wheelchair rattling in the back of the van. The poor son and daughter-in-law, sacrificing their lives to take care of the invalid matriarch. It will make the guardianship hearing a breeze. We can announce your takeover of the firm at the party. The night of the party arrived. The house was transformed. Crystal chandeliers sparkled, waiters circulated with champagne, and a string quartet played soft classical music in the ballroom. The crème de la crème of Seattle society was there. Judges, politicians, business rivals, and old friends. Lucas and Camila were in their element, dressed in designer clothes bought with my stolen money. Camila wore a backless red gown that screamed, "New money," and Lucas wore a tuxedo that fit him better than his conscience did. They accepted condolences about my condition with somber nods, playing the martyrs. I sat in a wheelchair in the corner of the ballroom, a heavy wool blanket over my legs, looking frail and diminished. My hair was unstyled, my face devoid of makeup. Camila hovered nearby, introducing me to people with a disclaimer. "She has her good days and bad days," she would say loudly, patting my shoulder. "Don't mind if she doesn't recognize you, it's the dementia." At 10 o'clock, just as the party was reaching its peak, Lucas took the microphone on the stage. He tapped it to gather attention. The room went silent. "Thank you all for coming," Lucas began, looking handsome and earnest. He had always been a good actor. "As many of you know, this has been a difficult year for the Vance family. My mother, the legendary Eleanor Vance, has had a tragic accident. It has become clear to us that she needs rest and professional care. It is with a heavy heart that we announce she will be stepping down from all public life to focus on her health. Camila and I will be assuming control of the family trust and the foundation to ensure her legacy is preserved." There was a polite ripple of applause, tinged with pity. I saw Camila smirk, a small, victorious curving of her red lips. They thought it was over. They thought they had won. I signaled to Silas, who was standing by the audio-visual booth, disguised as a technician. He cut the microphone feed. The feedback squeal made everyone wince. Then, the lights in the ballroom dimmed completely. "What's going on?" Lucas asked, tapping the dead mic, confusion marring his perfect performance. A single spotlight hit me. I threw the blanket off my legs. Using the armrests, I pushed myself up. It was painful, God. It was agonizing, the screws in my hip feeling like fire, but I stood. I stood tall, revealing a gown of emerald silk that I had hidden in the garment bag, not the frumpy invalid's robe Camila had dressed me in. I picked up the wireless microphone hidden in my chair cushions. "Sit down, Lucas," I said. My voice was not the tremble of an old woman. It was the voice that had commanded construction sites for 40 years. It was steel and concrete. It was the voice of the CEO. The room gasped. Lucas looked at me, his eyes widening in genuine terror. "Mom? You should be sitting, you're hip." I said, "Sit down," I commanded, my voice booming through the speakers. "And you too, Elena. Or do you still prefer Camila?" Camila froze. The color drained from her face so fast she looked like a wax figure. The name Elena struck her like a physical blow. "You wanted to tell a story about my decline," I addressed the crowd, seeing the shock on the faces of my friends and colleagues. "You wanted to tell everyone how I fell down the stairs, how I am losing my mind, how you are the devoted children sacrificing everything to care for me. But I think, in the spirit of the new year, we should start with the truth." I gestured to the massive projection screen behind the stage, usually used for charity videos. "Silas, play the tape." The screen flickered to life. The footage was high definition and crystal clear. It showed the upstairs hallway. It showed me adjusting the painting. It showed Camila walking up behind me. The entire room watched in horrified silence as she checked for witnesses, placed her hands on my back, and shoved. They heard my scream. It echoed through the ballroom, a ghostly reenactment of my pain. Then, the video cut to the angle from the foyer. They saw my broken body on the floor, and then, amplified by the ballroom's state-of-the-art sound system, they heard the laugh. They heard Lucas say, "That solves the timeline issue. She can't live alone if she can't walk." A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. A woman near the front covered her mouth with her hand. I saw Judge Reynolds, an old friend of William's, stand up, his face purple with rage. But I wasn't done. "Keep playing," I said coldly. The video shifted. It showed them in the kitchen, crushing blue pills into my herbal tea. It showed them going through my wall safe, stuffing stacks of cash into their pockets. It showed the meeting with their crooked lawyer, discussing how to bribe a doctor to testify to my incompetence. "She's got maybe 2 years left if we're lucky." Lucas's voice rang out from the speakers, discussing his mother's death, as if he were discussing the expiration date of a carton of milk. "But if we put her in the state facility, the cheap one, maybe she catches pneumonia sooner. Old people die there all the time." "Turn it off!" Lucas screamed, his voice cracking, sounding like a frightened child. He lunged for the technician booth. "It's fake! She made it up! It's deep fake!" 2 uniformed police officers stepped out from the shadows of the heavy velvet curtains. They intercepted him before he could reach the booth, tackling him when he tried to swing at them. 2 more officers approached Camila, who was trying to slip through the crowd toward the terrace exit like a rat fleeing a sinking ship. I watched them being handcuffed. The room was dead silent now. The music stopped, the conversations halted. The only sound was the click of the metal cuffs and Camila's panicked breathing. I walked slowly, with a limp, leaning on the cane I had concealed, but under my own power toward the stage. I looked down at my son. He was weeping now, begging, looking at me with those same eyes he used when he was 6 and broke a vase. "Mom, please," he sobbed, snot running down his nose. "She made me do it. I didn't want to. She has debts. Please, tell them to stop." I looked at him, and I felt a profound, aching sadness. I mourned the baby I held. I mourned the boy I raised. I mourned the hope I had held onto for 40 years. But the man before me was a stranger. He was a predator who had fed on my love until there was nothing left but bone. "You are right about one thing, Lucas," I said softly into the microphone, so only he and the front row could hear. "I am old, and I don't have time left to waste on people who try to kill me, not even the ones I gave birth to." "Officer," I nodded to the police lieutenant, a man I had briefed personally earlier that day. "Get them out of my house." They dragged them out. Camila was screaming obscenities, her mask fully slipped, cursing me in Russian and English, spitting at the officers. Lucas just hung his head, a broken man who had never learned to stand on his own 2 feet, finally facing the consequences of gravity. The legal fallout was swift, brutal, and public. The Vance family scandal dominated the Seattle headlines for months. With the video evidence, there was no plea deal offered. They were charged with attempted murder, elder abuse, grand larceny, conspiracy, and fraud. The trial took place 6 months later. I sat in the front row, watching the proceedings with a stoic expression. I listened to the testimony of the toxicologist who confirmed the sedatives in my system. I listened to the forensic accountant detail the theft. I listened to the testimony of the doctor they had bribed, who turned state's witness to save his own skin. When it was my turn to testify, the defense attorney tried to paint me as a vindictive, controlling mother who had driven her son to desperation. He asked if I loved my son. "I loved the potential of him," I answered, looking directly at the jury. "But you cannot love a person into being good, and you cannot let love become a suicide pact." Camila Elena was revealed to be wanted in 2 other states for similar schemes. She was sentenced to 25 years without parole. Lucas was sentenced to 15 years. When the gavel banged down, sealing his fate, he didn't look at me. He looked at the floor. I didn't cry. I had shed all my tears in the months leading up to the fall. It has been 18 months since that night. My hip still aches when it rains, a permanent reminder of the betrayal. I walk with a cane now, a sleek, ebony cane with a silver handle that I use to point at blueprints and, occasionally, to emphasize a point in a board meeting. I returned to the firm full-time. I realized that retirement is dangerous for a woman like me. I need to build. I need to create. We are currently designing a new wing for the Children's Hospital, a project that brings me immense satisfaction. The house is quiet again, but it is a peaceful quiet. I hired a live-in housekeeper, a woman named Maria, who I checked out thoroughly, and who treats me with genuine respect. not because she wants my money, but because I pay her a fair wage and treat her like a human being. I have filled the house with friends, with colleagues, with life that I chose, not life that was imposed on me. I established a new foundation in William's name, dedicated to legal defense for the elderly who are victims of financial and physical abuse. I spend my weekends reviewing cases, using my resources to help others who don't have the means to install military-grade surveillance or hire private investigators. I have become a crusader, a warning to predators that the gray-haired woman in the corner might just be the most dangerous person in the room. People ask me if I am lonely. They ask if I regret sending my only child to prison. It is a question that comes from a place of sentimentality, a belief that biology is a sacred bond that supersedes all sin. They want me to be the tragic mother, eternally weeping for her lost boy. I tell them this: a garden does not flourish because you refuse to pull the weeds. You can water a weed, you can give it sunlight, you can love it with all your heart, but it will still choke the life out of the flowers you planted. Lucas was my son, but he was also the weed that was killing me. I learned that family is not defined by whose DNA you carry, but by who stands beside you when the floor falls out from under you. It is defined by respect, by kindness, and by loyalty. Trust is the most expensive currency on earth. Do not give it away to those who are counterfeit. I am Eleanor Vance. I am broken, I am welded back together, and I am still standing. And as I look out over the Seattle skyline from my terrace, watching the buildings I helped create shimmer in the twilight, I know one thing for certain: the foundation is solid. The house will not fall. And neither will I.